This is the video on Alexander the Great. He was listed in Manetho's King's List as a king, so I thought I'd do a video on him as some kind of background to who he actually was. He was born Alexander III in July 356 BCE. He died in 323 BCE, aged between 33 years of age. He was tutored by Aristotle until he was 16, and then his father, Philip II of Macedonia, took him on campaign with him. Now, Philip II's objective is to become the chief general of Greece, so united Greece, so he can then invade the Ionian islands and settlements along the Turkish seaboard and recapture those Greek settlements. So that's his objectives. But before he can do that, he's got to subdue the most powerful cities in Greece. And there were always problems with the Thracians, the Athenians, the Thebans and the Corinthians. So for 4 years, Alexander and his father Philip campaigned against those cities. In 336 BCE, Philip II of Macedonia was murdered and Alexander III became king. I will now refer to him as Alexander the Great. He was 20 years of age. Now, to consolidate his position, Alexander did a few things. He murdered former cousins. He murdered 2 Macedonian princes. Philip II's second wife and daughter were also burned to life by his mother, and he murdered a truceless. So that's how you gained power in the ancient world. When he became king of Macedonia, the city-states thought, well, he's a young lad at 20, we don't have to worry. There were revolts in Thebes and Athens and Thessaly and Thrace and Ilya and in the Balkans. So all of that had to be dealt with before he could then set his firm objective on what his father wanted to achieve, Philip II. So it only took him 2 years to subdue the rest of Greece, and in 334 BCE he started his campaign to free the Ionian people. He took with him 48,100 soldiers, 6,100 cavalry. He had 120 ships, triremes to protect the carriers, the troop carriers, and of course all the provisions that he would need. He had 38,000 sailors, so it was a big event. Alexander departed from the Hellespont and crossed into Asia. There was the first battle at Granicus in 334 BCE. Now he was up against 20 to 30,000 Persians, and he had a force of 37,100. So he was pretty well equally matched with the Persian generals. It was a victory for Alexander. He then went on to Halicarnassus and Lycia and Gordium. There was another battle at Issus. This time Darius III was in attendance, leading his grand army in 332 BCE. The Greeks had 13,000 Pelsets, 22,000 heavy infantrymen, so they would be hoplites. The Pelsets were really javelin throwers, and 5,850 cavalrymen. So a force of around about 41,000. The Persians, under the leadership of Darius III, had 10,000 immortals. Remember, the immortals were always replaced if any of them fell in battle. 10,000 Greek mercenaries. So Alexander's got to fight his own countrymen. They've been purchased by Darius III to support his army. 11,000 cavalry, 20,000 levies. So those 20,000 levies would have been brought into his army all over his empire. The conservative estimate is 50 to 60,000. Some scholars think it was 100,000 Persian forces. Wow. So he was greatly outnumbered, probably at least 2 to 1. So let's say he was outnumbered 2 to 1. Remember who Darius III was? He had murdered his way to the throne. Do you remember? He was created by a eunuch in the harem who poisoned Atrixus and was going to use Darius as a puppet. Darius murdered the eunuch and took control for himself. So he's only been in the job 2 or 3 years, and he's got to defend his empire against this young lad of 22. From Alexandria's point of view, he believed that he was the son of Zeus and the son of Philip II, the most successful general in the whole of Greece. And after he quelled the revolts in Greece, the Greeks made him the chief general of Greece. So they gave him a mandate. These events are what the gods want, for me to free the Ionian people. And that was really the main aim of this whole campaign, was to free the Ionian people, the Ionian Greeks, from Persian rule. Alexander manoeuvred his troops to give him the most favourable battleground. Issus was a small area, and for a large army, it didn't give Darius III a chance to manoeuvre his troops into its best use as an effective force, whereas Alexander had a more mobile, smaller force and was able to react better. The battle was won by Alexander. Darius III fled the battlefield, leaving his wife and children behind him, and a great amount of treasure which would have probably have been used to pay the Greek mercenaries. After Issus, Alexander travelled to the city of Tyre, Phoenician city. He needed to capture this city to supply his army from Greece. The problem with Tyre was the city was in a really defensible position. It was located on an island just off the coast. This made it impregnable to a sea assault. Alexander decided to blockade the city. For 7 months, nothing went in or came out, and the defenders refused to give way. So he got his army to build a causeway from the mainland to the island, and then that way they could use their siege machines on reducing the walls. Once they got into the city, it was terrible. You're talking about 8 or 9 months to take a city, to hold up a campaign. In his revenge, Alexander had 8,000 civilians killed. 30,000 residents and foreigners were sold into slavery, probably to get money to pay for his troops. 6,000 fighting men were killed. 2,000 civilians were crucified on the beach. And the king of Tyre and the nobility were pardoned. So that's how it went. You know, if you was a nobility, you probably survived. Further up the coast was the fortress of Gaza, which was under Persian control. And the garrison commander was given orders by Darius to delay Alexander as much as possible so he could gather another large army. The problem with this garrison was it was built on the hill. Remember Tutmosis III? He chose a good spot, and he would have used this fortress for his kickoff to launch his campaigns into the Canaanite and Syrian areas. So the fortress was located on a hill, and it had an 18 meters walls all the way around it. So it wasn't going to be an easy thing to get into this fortress. Again, Alexander gave them the chance to surrender with their lives. They refused. Remember, the garrison commander was under orders from the Persian king. When the fortress was taken, all men of military age were put to the sword. Women and children were sold into slavery. Then Alexander travelled on to Egypt. The satrap governor of Egypt surrendered immediately. Remember, he was in that precarious position. He was appointed by Atrixus, and Atrixus had been murdered by Darius III. So he wasn't really up for being loyal to Darius III in any way. Once Egypt was occupied by Alexander's forces, he travelled off to Siwa Oasis. Siwa had a cult of Amun installed there a number of years earlier, and he needed the oracle of Amun to tell him his future. The oracle declared that Alexander was indeed the son of Amun. That gave him a mandate to become the Pharaoh of Egypt. Alexander ordered a new city to be built on the delta, which was going to be called Alexandria, one of the greatest cities in the Mediterranean world. In 331 BCE, Alexander left Egypt. So if you think about what he managed to achieve in that time, he won the Battle of Issus, he laid siege to Tyre and Gaza, went to Egypt, went to the oracle of Siwa, and left all within a year. Wow, amazing. Alexander went on to conquer Persia in 329 BCE. Then he went into India and eventually returned to Babylon and died in 323 BCE, aged 32-33. Now, the ancient records say it took 12 days for Alexander to die, so it was suggested that it was some kind of slow poison, that he'd been poisoned. On his deathbed, he said he wanted to be buried at Siwa Oasis with his father Amun. He recognized himself as being a form of Zeus Amun, and that's where he wanted to be buried, in Siwa. In Egypt, the satrap of Egypt had been awarded to one of Alexander's most favoured generals, Ptolemy, and one of his best friends. In name only, Philip Alexander, the half-brother of Alexander, had been called Pharaoh of Egypt between 323 BCE and 317 BCE. Unfortunately for Philip, he was recorded as being a bit of a half-wit and slow, and there was a revolt in Macedonia. Alexander's mother, Olympia, invaded with troops and had him killed. The next pharaoh of Egypt in name only was Alexander IV. He was the son of Alexander the Great and the Persian princess Roxanne. Again, it's in name only, because she was captured and killed along with her son. So that was between 317 BCE and 305 BCE. Civil war broke out amongst Alexander's generals, and this war went on for quite a few years. The war broke out in 321 BCE. Ptolemy was in Egypt as satrap, and he knew that his best friend wanted to be buried at Siwa. The other generals in the Greek army wanted Alexander to be returned back to Macedonia, his homeland, and buried there. It was like a political thing. However, Ptolemy intercepted Alexander's body and took it to Memphis, and later had it reburied in Alexandria. By doing so, he empowered himself with a mandate to be Pharaoh of Egypt. Clever. The civil war went on for a number of years, so 321 BCE, and in 305 BCE, Ptolemy declared himself as king of Egypt, as Pharaoh. So Ptolemy creates his own dynasty, and that is the Ptolemaic dynasty, and that's the next video we're going to see, or the one that I'm going to make. So if you like this video, press your subscribe button, thumbs up if you liked it, and leave any comments, and I'll see you real soon. Bye for now.